Hello and welcome to London Property. I'm your host Farnaz Fazaipour and we're delighted to welcome back to the show Lulu Egerton. Welcome back.
Thank you, Farnaz.
We're pulling out the big guns, Lulu, for this one because, we've had a very difficult market and it'll be good to hear some light at the end of the tunnel and just generally speaking what's been going on. So we're starting this particular series with a lens on, what are the non-DOMs saying? So how has that affected the market? What are the conversations you've been having? What's the general sentiment of these people? How unwanted are they feeling?
Well, I think the thing is about rich people, and rich people may be people who've worked hard and made money, or it may be family wealth. I think they're a bit flawed and flabbergasted by the fact that they're so conspicuously, I think, being really having to think very seriously about moving out of the country. I mean, they all love England, and, lots of them are born here. I mean, it's not like they're international people here who are moving out necessarily, but the British brought their kids up here, love the country, love everything about it, very invested in Great Britain PLC. But the realities is that successive governments, and it's not just our current government, have really made huge inroads into taxing their wealth. And I think they see it very much as a second tax. And I think that it is with great reluctance that they've now had to think about moving out of the country. And more are. I mean, quite a lot aren't. They're just sitting tight. I was sitting next door to somebody at dinner last week who's hugely in the public eye and worth a lot of money, started with nothing, stacking shelves in Tesco type thing, and he's staying. He said, I pay my taxes and I'm going to stay. So it's a mixed picture, but as many people go, so we are actually finding quite a lot of people coming here, and the largest group of that is the Americans.
Yes, well, we've all been talking about the Americans, for some time now as being kind of the replacement to this exodus of wealth that we've had with their own political situation going on and what's going on in their country. But it is actually, very much a reality, isn't it? And the strength of the dollar helps too.
Well, it is a reality, and interestingly, the Americans always used to go north of the park, which is where the American school is. What we've really noticed is that actually they're buying up the houses in Chelsea and Notting Hill much more. Interestingly, politics is one thing, but it's the drugs and the guns, which are the real things that have made them want a better life for their kids. I think people feel around politics, as we do in Great Britain, politicians and political parties come and go, but actually a culture of guns and drugs is something that's really upsetting the American professional classes, and as a consequence they are making massive decisions to actually leave the country, and they choose Great Britain as the country of choice because of the language. I mean, the fact that we've got fantastic schools and, religious tolerance and rule of law is a bonus. But they are definitely sort of coming Europe way rather than perhaps going to Canada or South America. They love London, the Americans. And it's a wonderful stepping stone to Europe for education for the kids as well.
Yeah.
Nice weekends away. So that has been a pleasure, actually, to have quite so many Americans coming down our way.
And what would you say has been the impact? Do you think that the impact on this sort of tax exodus that we've had is really visible on the market, or do you think there's still a bit of a hold and see sentiment? What do you think's been going on?
Well, I think there are a number of things. It's sort of moving plates, spinning plates, perhaps better description. So it's a generational thing. In the olden days, the international community would buy houses and apartments in London as their London base, and maybe one of sort of 4 or 5 houses that they own around the world. And they would come with their staff. And it was a sort of really a humming a kind of property. It was always used by members of the family, etc. But nowadays, successive generations since sort of the early 70s, when it was all the oil wealth from the Middle East, and subsequent the 80s and 90s, 2000s, you know, and you might have the head of Shell living in Chester Square or whatever. The realities are is successive generations live much more informally. So they don't want the big houses, which at the moment are rather left languishing, with the prices coming down quite regularly. They prefer apartments. They prefer to be near a park. They're very keen on keep fit, running. They like apartments which have got, you know, lots of service and which have got gyms and leisure centres. And of course, the hotels in London have got so extremely good. You know, 7-star hotels have opened last year and this year. And a lot of the international community, for which we're sort of principally talking about here, they take suites in the big hotels and stay there. So actually owning in London is something they don't do. So that sort of audience has really taken a hit.
And would you say that that's more to do with the inheritance tax than anything else?
I think it's inheritance tax. I think it's also managing a property, you know, from far away. And that's why there are so many sort of excellent concierge businesses. But I think managing a property, inheritance tax, I think the younger generation don't want to live like that anymore. You know, we're selling a lot of flats, and I know a lot of flats are being bought in the cool places like sort of Primrose Hill and Shoreditch. I mean, these would not have been addresses and locations where the international high net worth would have gone 30 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of their kids are going east, aren't they?
A lot of their kids are going east. So it's sort of shifting patterns and shifting places. So lots of ingredients are coming in to make the target audience that was the traditional purchaser of prime central London be different. But the principal target audience is still the British. I mean, the English are very rich when it comes to buying in Chelsea, for instance, because property is an asset class they really understand.
Yeah.
So Chelsea and Notting Hill have ended up becoming the most sort of resilient postcodes, I would say, in the last 2 years.
And would you say it's very obvious that the market is shifting towards the locals? Because, you know, one of the things that we're kind of debating is, you know, when we had this sort of tax advantage for people who are from overseas, it affected both the buy-to-let market and the super prime residential market. And with taxation being introduced first on individuals for their lettings, not being able to deduct their interest payments from their income, and then, you know, all these changes that kept getting introduced about the non-doms, you know, the kind of flip side of that coin, and hopefully the reason that all these changes were being made was in order to make it affordable for the locals to go back to the market. And are you seeing that shift? I mean, you know, when you and I were buying our first flats, you know, we could put down 10, 20% and get an 80% mortgage and everything was hunky-dory. And is that something that we can see we're going towards?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the first flat I bought was £33,500. I mean, you know, in Brook Green. So, but that was going back to 1984. So I don't think we'll go back to those times. But what you are seeing is such a softening in prices. And we're seeing much greater activity between sort of 850,000 and sort of 6 million. I know that sounds a huge spread, but the market above that is much more challenged. Whereas, you know, lots more people have got 1 or 2 or 3 million, and suddenly houses which were out of reach are now affordable. And, you know, the British have taken up the slack. And that's very much the professional classes, you know, the lawyers, the bankers, the accountants, those in media. They might have gone to Fulham, you know, 4 years ago, but now they can actually find something in Chelsea, South Ken, and in parts of Belgravia.
So there is a bit of a shift towards
absolutely
locals when it comes to property, which is ultimately, you know, any politician's dream, I suppose.
Well, it's a great thing because it means that actually the area becomes a real community. Now, Chelsea and Notting Hill are already communities because they're principally house areas. And I always find that in house areas, there's much more a sense of sort of the country village. You know, people live there for much longer. There's a much greater sort of stabilisation of knowing who your neighbours are, your family are brought up there. Coupled with this, you know, the Cadogan and the Grosvenor estate are making huge investments in their estate, which is going more to creating more of a sense of community.
Yeah.
So I think what's really interesting is that buyers have really appreciated that. You know, Pavilion Road is marvellous. Duke of York Square is marvellous. You know, the investment the Cadogan are doing in Sloane Street is fantastic for the area. The Grosvenor, you know, Elizabeth Street and Mottcombe Street, you know, these places are becoming real hubs. And in Notting Hill, it's got, you know, that sort of same thing. I mean, South Kensington, the old Brompton Road is sort of work in progress. That's really fallen off a bit, and you know, that sort of flat land, and that kind of feels that it needs some help. Kensington High Street is being completely sort of reorganized, and I think that will become a really good hub up there. So I think people go where there is community. You know, we're creatures of social habit. We need to be able to walk to get our cup of coffee, and we like that to be a nice experience.
Yeah, I think that being on these aristocratic estates, you know, you really see the value of what they do in the kind of communal areas.
Yep.
The impact it has on the real estate values.
Absolutely, yes.
It's
I
very
mean, their investment
Yeah.
for our benefit, and
Yeah.
of course for their benefit. I mean, they're not doing it for their blue eyes, but you know, retailers pay more rent.
Yeah.
The whole thing becomes just
They're curating, really. They're curating,
yeah,
as opposed to just renting it to whoever wants to
Yeah.
rent it, which is a very obvious change. So, would you say that you know, after a series of bad news that we've had over the years, we're coming to a point where things are starting to get active and they're a bit more optimistic? What are you feeling?
I would definitely say this year is much better than last year, the year before, which were brutal because it was a bit like sort of sliding down into nobody knew quite what, and it was a bit like catching the falling ball. In a way, the Labour Party, having been so clear about second homes and income tax, has in a way removed unknowns, so everybody knows where they are. That has definitely impacted prices. But you know, Farnaz, we've got to remember the amount of trades that actually happen in prime central London is absolutely tiny. You know, the newspapers talk about, you know, the rich as if it's sort of millions and millions of them. I mean, the transactions that happen in super prime London are tiny. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's a tiny amount of transactions which somehow seem to always colour the judgment of successive governments when they're getting to a sort of budget day. You know, property has become a political football, property has become an economic football, and actually all you want, surely, is for your citizens in any country to be able to afford something that they can afford and live happily ever after. I know that the prices aren't for the faint-hearted, but it is a tiny area. I mean, I probably sell property in something like 1.5 square miles of real estate. I mean, this country is huge with 70 million people. So I think, you know, what's happened in this whole sort of discussion around property and the super rich and their relationship with property is it's really blown out of proportion.
It's a lot of noise, isn't it, for a very tiny segment?
Well, I wish it was a lot of noise. The trouble is, it's not just noise anymore. It is actually, you know, impacting the rental market. It's impacting, you know, what sellers, you know, who have to sell because they may have died or whatever it is. You know, the whole process is much longer because there's so much insecurity around property ownership. And actually, I would say that in a capitalist society, you need to encourage people to own. I fully appreciate that the prices are high and they have tumbled in the last 3 or 4 years. But I think that the government, you know, in attacking the rich, it's such a tiny amount of people that actually I think that the conversation is skewed about what's really happening and to whom it is really directed at.
What would be your conclusion of where we are and where you think the immediate future is going to be for people who are listening and wondering, should I buy, should I sell?
Well, I think right now at the moment for buyers, I think at last there's real value. I mean, we are seeing some fantastic houses and flats go for really quite modest sums by comparison to what they have been going for. So I would say to you, get looking and look hard and make an offer. You wouldn't necessarily choose to be on the market right now unless you had to. And most of the reasons of my clients are very natural. You know, it's passage of time, natural lifestyle of the house or the flat, children leaving home, them wanting to liquidate some funds so that children can get on the ladder, death, divorce, and debt.
The three Ds, yeah.
The three Ds.
Yeah.
But I genuinely think there is value in the market at the moment. I mean, I was looking at some houses the other day, and I mean, it's something unbelievable. Like between 3 million and 5 million in Chelsea, there are 81 houses for sale. I mean, you know, that's a lot. I mean, out of choice, you know, you can really make a decision when you have that kind of choice. So I would say it's a really good time to look. I think for sellers, it's really tough because I think where expectation is and where the prices actually end up landing is quite often a big gulf. And I think, you know, agents and vendors alike were still trying to establish price points in some of these streets. But more and more is beginning to transact. So there is a sense of common ground now. Personally, I think we're probably bumping along the bottom of all the prices, having had the prices come down over the last 3 or 4 years. But, you know, lots of people are waiting to see what Rachel Reeves will say in the autumn statement. I mean, that may attack property ownership again in some way, or the taxes around it.
Yeah.
So I know from a couple of my buyers, they've said, look, you know, we will buy, but we want to see what she says in the autumn. And the thing is about my market is it needs certainty. So actually the Labour Party, having said what they did recently, created certainty. But we now have got more uncertainty because, you know, the government needs lots more money.
Yeah.
And so will property be attacked again? And I just think there's plenty of money in London. London is not running out of money. There's lots of very, very successful people here who work hard and want to buy. They just don't want to overpay. So it's tough for sellers, and I think you just have to hold your nerve.
Well, I think after 10 years or so of being flat, then I think that the answer is that, you know, if you're waiting for the market to bottom out, you generally means you've missed it.
Yes, but I think we're sort of in that environment right now. And I think in the next 1, 2, 3 years, I don't know that there'll be much difference. But, you know, markets change in a nanosecond. I mean, if the interest rates come down next year quite aggressively, who's to say that that won't be the trigger where people start coming in? Because it's not just about one thing, property. And I remember my very wise chairman at Lane Fox, called Peter Lowndes, he used to say to me, you know, markets are driven by sentiment. Quite often they're not driven by one specific thing.
Yeah. And it's usually about quarterly in our market, I think. Every quarter there's a slightly different twist.
Yes. And things happen so fast at the moment. I think people, you know, the younger generation are worried about their jobs. And or do they work here, or do they go to Dubai for 10 years, or do they go somewhere else? So, I mean, you know, lots of people are thinking about lots of different things at the moment. And property sometimes just, you know, just gets put on the back burner. So, you know, I would say just go for it now and start looking. And I think you may find, you're very surprised, you can find something really nice out there.
And I think, you know, when you're looking for a home, you know, you need to make a decision for your home. It's not always about the investment. You've got to get what's right for you and your family that you're going to be in for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
And, you know, these things, as you say, there's a lot of different factors that come into it. But, you know, we do the news bulletins and we keep reading about how mortgage products are going to be changed and how the way that people are qualifying and their rents could come into the equation, that if you've been paying rent for 15 years, that should be part of the process of applying for a mortgage. So there should be some changes to start getting us all, you know, moving again.
Yes, hopefully. I mean, hopefully. But like I said, these areas that we sell in are so small, and the transactions actually in them are so few by comparison to throughout the country, is that...
they're just newsworthy.
They're just newsworthy and they sort of make a headline.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, it's a bit like the laws of the jungle. There's always the strongest animal. And in capitalist societies, there's always people who are, you know, earning more than others, you know, and I just think that, you know, there are other ways of perhaps raising tax and which are not continue to stress the property industry.
Yeah. Otherwise, they have to give us all jobs.
Yes, well,
Thank you very much for coming again.
Not at all. Lovely to see you,
we look
Farnaz.
forward to catching up with you. And obviously, you can tell from this conversation that we're speaking to someone who knows Chelsea intimately. You're always my go-to person whenever I have a Chelsea question. And if you are listening and you need some help, do get in touch with us and we'll make sure to connect you to the right professional for your property challenges. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Farnaz.